So as we start to get into Rails, part of the reason to introduce the main concepts, software as a service, and start out with this simpler Sinatra framework is to expose you to what the most basic pieces of machinery are in web apps and understand how a simple framework helps you sort of encapsulate and get some of those details out of the way. And the rationale for that is Rails is a much more powerful framework. The kinds of things it does are the same as the kinds of things Sinatra does, but the complexity and flexibility of how it can do them is significantly more. So that's why we sort of use Sinatra as an on-ramp. And so in getting into Rails, I'm going to take the approach of starting from some of the machinery we're already familiar with in Sinatra and working our way through up to Rails by first introducing the idea of model view controller and why Rails as a framework is sort of much more opinionated about the structure of your app compared with Sinatra. With that background, we'll take a trip through a Rails app and how its routing and other mechanisms work. But again, trying to tie each one of those things back to this bridging concept of the machinery is already there. You've seen it in Sinatra. Now, how does Rails do it? Part of that is going to be talking about the link between models in the model view controller framework and the idea that we've already visited about RESTful resources. There's essentially a one-to-one mapping between them, and understanding why and how Rails does that greatly simplifies the way that you approach the design of Rails apps and understanding the mechanisms that it provides. We will talk a little bit about active record, which is how the model part of model view controller is instantiated in Rails. And as always, a caveat to all of this, the only thing we have time to cover in lecture is the conceptual foundation. The goal is to give you enough conceptual vocabulary to put you in a better place when you read the book, when you look at the examples, much more details that are in there, and in particular, when you work on the chips. Don't skip the chips, because really grappling with this stuff and getting it under your fingers is the only way to sort of match up the conceptual part with the practical part. I'm going to make a very cautious and maybe controversial suggestion. You could learn from LLMs. This is the first time in the history of this course that I've ever tried to do this, because it wasn't possible previously. But I recently tried this out. I gave a popular LLM the following prompt: create a Rails app that has a single resource called person with attributes name and birth date and has controller actions and views supporting the basic CRUD operations on a person. It didn't write the whole app, but it gave me a surprising amount. And most of what it gave me was reasonable. And most of the explanations preceding each little chunk of code were also reasonable. Reasonable doesn't mean they were perfect, but it strikes me that this might not be a bad way to sort of generate a bunch of examples that you can look at and study, so you start to sort of get familiar with seeing what the programming patterns look like. By the way, the solution that it provided to my prompt uses scaffolding, which we're going to talk about during one of our live demos. But you can still learn quite a bit by reading the scaffolded code. So as usual, use at your own risk. It is not a substitute for actually studying stuff, for talking to your TA if you're not sure, for going to office hours. But it's one more tool in the toolkit, so I thought I'd put it out there. And of course, needless to say, if you're going to try this after you have sort of taken a crack at grappling with it yourself.